Indiana Jones possesses two key attributes that puts him, in my opinion, on the Mount Rushmore of the best characters of all time. And while his fedora and whip are awesome, those are not the two key attributes that I'm talking about. What then makes Indy one of the best characters of all time? Let's get into it. By the way, if you agree that Indy is one of the best characters in film history, hit the like button. And if you don't, you need to leave me a comment down below and let me know who makes it onto your Mount Rushmore of great film characters. My name is Sherer and I write novels and screenplays, which means I care a great deal about great stories. I wanted to break down Indiana Jones as a character to understand why so many people like me love Indy and his movies. Now, while Indy's character design is amazing, that's not what puts him on the Mount Rushmore of great characters. It certainly doesn't hurt. The fedora, the whip, his revolver, the fantastic leather jacket, all spectacular, and he's played by Harrison Ford, who will likely go down as one of the biggest movie stars in history. But a character's costuming and portrayal does not make for an iconic character. If it did, some of these characters might be in the running to show up on a Mount Rushmore of great characters. By the way, The Rocketeer is a vastly underrated film. But my point is this: all of those characters have amazing character design, and some of them are portrayed by great actors, but most of us are not talking about putting them on the Mount Rushmore of great characters. Now, Indiana Jones is number 2, second only to Atticus Finch, another phenomenal character when it comes to AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains list. And it all has to do with the writing. It's about Indy's character development. Indiana Jones is one of the best characters of all time because his character development revolves around our shared human experience. Now, before I get into specific examples, which I will do, let's address the elephant in the room. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade follow a similar format and structure that exemplify why we love Indiana Jones. But the most controversial Indiana Jones film, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, does not follow the same character development, the same character arc that Indy goes through. And maybe that's why Kingdom of the Crystal Skull wasn't received as well as the first 3 films. I'll get into it. You can make your own decision. Now, let's look at Indiana Jones at the beginning of each film. One of the 2 important attributes of how Indy is portrayed by the film's creators is that he values things over people. Let me show you what I mean by Indy valuing things over people. Here's an abbreviated clip from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Take note of how Indy values the object he's searching for over and above the human beings around him. Indiana Jones is using the local guides to help him get the fertility idol, and he doesn't have much remorse for them when they eventually die. When he meets Marion, a former love interest of his, he doesn't even bother to ask how she's doing. He goes straight to asking about the headpiece of the Staff of Ra. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy starts the movie valuing things over people. Now, let's take a look at Temple of Doom. Did you notice how Indy was ready to use Willie as a pincushion in order to get the Eye of the Peacock diamond? And how he was willing to put everyone in Club Obi-Wan in danger to get that diamond? Not to mention he's putting a kid, Short Round, in danger by having him drive him around. So we're seeing a theme. Indy values things over people at the beginning of these films, but let's look at The Last Crusade to see if that's still true. Indy abandons everyone in the Boy Scout troop in order to get the Cross of Coronado from the grave robbers. Then later in life, he blows up a ship to get the cross back. I would also argue that he doesn't seem as concerned about his father's well-being as he does with finding the Holy Grail. Even his attitude towards Elsa seems more in valuing her as a thing to be used as opposed to a human being. So again, Indy's valuing things over people and treating people like objects somewhat. But let's look at everyone's favorite film, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Now notice the subtle difference in Indy. In these prior 3 films, he was attempting to obtain an item. In Raiders, he wanted to get the fertility idol before Belloc got it. In Temple of Doom, he wanted the Eye of the Peacock in exchange for giving Lao Chi the remains of Nurhaci. In Last Crusade, he wanted to steal the Cross of Coronado from the grave robbers. But in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Indy isn't trying to get the alien body. He's trying to prevent the Russians from getting it. Now, that's a minor difference, but it has a major impact on his character arc. But valuing things over people isn't the only critical aspect of Indy's character development. In fact, I'm even a bigger fan of the one I'm about to talk about. In the first 3 films, Indy also goes from skepticism to belief. Let's look at some more clips. South American guides in Raiders seem to believe in the spiritual implications of stealing the fertility idol, but Indy is unfazed. When he's approached by the US government, who tell him about the Nazis searching for the Ark of the Covenant, he talks about the power of God as if it's just some superstition. In the beginning of Temple of Doom, he's interested in the Thuggee cult, but he doesn't seem particularly unnerved by the Sankara stones or the power they may or may not possess. In The Last Crusade, Indy is more focused on the value of the Holy Grail as it relates to its historical significance as opposed to its supposed healing powers. In other words, in each of these films, Indiana Jones is a skeptic. He doesn't attribute any particular value to the supernatural at the beginning of the film. Now, with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the same thing isn't true. Indiana Jones knows about the alien autopsy. He's the one that leads the Russians to the remains. He's not skeptical at all. He already has a reason to believe that interdimensional beings actually exist. If we take Crystal Skull and set it aside for just a minute, in the first 3 Indiana Jones films, 2 things become very obvious about Indy and his character development. 1, Indiana Jones begins each film valuing things over people, and 2, Indiana Jones starts out as a skeptic who does not believe in the supernatural. By the way, if you're a writer like me and you're wondering how to write these great characters like Indiana Jones, check out my follow-up video on my other YouTube channel, How Stories Work with Sherer. I'll be talking about how you can write a character like Indiana Jones using some of these same lessons that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford used in the Indiana Jones trilogy. So these 2 aspects of Indy's character development are essential to audiences loving Indy as a character. Why do they love him? Partially because of these 2 things. Now, why is that? Well, first, if Indy didn't change by the end of these films, he wouldn't be anywhere near the Mount Rushmore of great characters. The reality is he needs to change in order for us to side with him and ultimately root for him. And second, these 2 attributes of his character relate directly to the shared human experience that most of the audience will resonate with. We know that, like Indy, there are times where we value things over people. And many of us, myself included, can be skeptical of the supernatural. In other words, Indiana Jones is a great character because he's like us. We can see ourselves or those around us in his character journey. But like I said, if Indy doesn't change throughout the course of these movies, he does not make it onto my Mount Rushmore of great film characters. If Indiana Jones doesn't change, he's just an asshole. So now let's take a look at the end of each film to see how Indy's character journey comes to an end and how he realizes that he should change based on what he learns in the films. At the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy threatens to blow up the Ark of the Covenant with a bazooka. Now he doesn't. Why? 2 reasons. 1, he might harm Marion in the ensuing battle if the Nazis refuse to let her go. And 2, he has begun to wonder if the Ark of the Covenant really does contain the supernatural power of God. But just a few minutes later, when the Nazis open up the Ark of the Covenant, notice that Indy tells Marion not to look. That solidifies his character journey. At the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy has learned to value people over things, and he now believes in the supernatural. He's no longer a skeptic. If Indy still valued the Ark over Marion, he would have wanted to see what was inside. And if Indy was still a skeptic, he would not have believed in the power of God at all, meaning he could have still looked at the Ark. But Indy values Marion over the Ark. He tells her not to look, and then he turns away from it as well. He does that because he now believes in the supernatural. The same is true in Temple of Doom. As Indy investigates the Thuggee cult, he becomes possessed. And he finds all of the child slaves working in the mines. Though he's interested in recovering the Sankara stones, he changes his focus to include saving the children. And when he encounters Molaram on the bridge, he tells Molaram that he betrayed Shiva. If Indy still valued things over people, he would not have risked his life for the child slaves. And if Indy was still a skeptic, he would not have believed in the power of the stones to overcome Molaram on the bridge. At the end of Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones values people over things, and again, has come to believe in the supernatural power of the Sankara stones. And of course, the same thing is true in The Last Crusade. First, Indy has to believe in the story of Jesus enough to identify the correct cup. And then he believes in its healing properties enough to take the cup to his father. He's no longer a skeptic. He believes the cup will actually heal his father. Then, when the building starts to crumble around them, Indy tries to save Elsa, a woman he looked at more as an opportunity for sexual conquest than as an intelligent, equal human. But even after she betrays Indy, he still tries to save her. Now, of course, Elsa still values the Holy Grail, the thing, more than she values Indy, and so therefore she dies, showcasing the antithesis of Indy's change. But when Indy is put in the same situation, his father, Henry, tells him to let the Holy Grail go, and he does. He values his relationship with his father over and above the Holy Grail. So, if you set Crystal Skull aside, Indiana Jones as a character reiterates to us, the audience, two core things. One, we should value people over things. And two, despite our skepticism, there are things that we cannot explain. Now, those two messages may not resonate with you, but they do resonate with most audiences. In fact, they resonate deeply, and for good reason. Many of us have shared some of the same experiences that Indiana Jones has. Not as a fedora-wearing, whip-cracking archaeologist, but as everyday people trying to better ourselves and our understanding of the world. And those two things are why Indiana Jones deserves a spot on the Mount Rushmore of great film characters. And of course, the fedora, the whip, revolver, and leather jacket certainly don't hurt. If you haven't hit that like button yet, please do that for me. And while you're at it, subscribe to the Story Geeks channel for more deep dives into storytelling. And if you're a writer, remember, I'm doing that other video on how stories work with Sherer. So if you want to understand how to write a character like this, let's talk about that over on my other channel. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next show.